My name is Isla Harrington, and this is the story of how I was framed for fraud by the man I built an empire with, and how I walked out of court not just vindicated but holding everything he once thought was his. But first, you have to understand the beginning. I met Julian Cross in my second year at Wharton. He was charismatic in the way that made boardrooms lean in and professors forgive late papers. I was different, quiet, calculating, the kind of woman who took notes and margins and solved spreadsheets like they were poetry. We were perfect in that doomed kind of way. We co-founded Cross and Harrington Consulting after graduation. I built the back end, the projections, the systems. He worked the front end client's charm capital. And it worked. For 12 years it worked. We went from basement brainstorming sessions to a sleek office on the 33rd floor overlooking the skyline. We were married by year 3. We were millionaires by year 6. We were strangers by year 10. But I didn't realize how much of a stranger he had become until the morning I opened a manila envelope left on our marble kitchen counter. Inside a subpoena. A formal accusation of financial misconduct, tax evasion, wire fraud, forged authorization of fund transfers totaling $6.2 million across 4 fiscal years. My signature was on everything. I remember standing there in my silk robe, coffee growing cold in my hand as the world I thought I owned crumbled beneath me. Julian walked into the room moments later, completely calm, like he didn't just plant a bomb and wait for it to go off. "I warned you," he said softly, buttering a piece of toast. "You always said you hated the spotlight. Let me handle it from here." Let him handle it. Handle what? My career, my name. He looked me in the eye and delivered the final blow, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't personal, Isla. It's survival. And you've always been better in the background." That was the moment everything inside me froze. Grief would come later, but in that moment all I felt was cold clarity. I was being erased, systematically, legally, efficiently. And the worst part, I had designed the system that was now being used against me. Every clause, every signature workflow, every financial authorization pathway, I had built them. And Julian had used them like weapons. The first hearing was brutal. His legal team, a hand-picked set of ex-prosecutors and financial experts, painted me as emotionally unstable, erratic, unfit to manage money at that scale. They presented forged documents that bore my signature, emails I'd never written but couldn't definitively disprove. They cited vague episodes of anxiety I'd confided in Julian about years ago, weaponized my own vulnerability and Julian. He played the grieving husband. He stood on the witness stand with tears in his eyes, saying things like, "I didn't want to do this, but I have a fiduciary duty to the board and I begged her to get help." He was smooth, he was lethal, he was winning. My name trended on social media for days. Cold-blooded CFO collapses empire. Another woman playing victim after getting caught. Even my closest colleagues didn't reach out. Not because they believed him, but because they didn't want to be dragged down with me. And me, I didn't cry. Not in the courtroom, not when the headlines turned, not even when my accounts were frozen and I had to ask my assistant for help buying groceries. Because I knew one thing: I wasn't the villain in this story. But I was about to become something far more dangerous. See, Julian had made one fatal mistake. He assumed I would go quietly. He thought humiliation would be enough to break me. That legal isolation would force me to settle, sign away, my shares disappear into some luxury rehab center to avoid prison. But I wasn't raised to run. I was raised by a father who taught me to never sign anything I didn't understand, and a mother who reminded me over and over the most dangerous woman in the room is the one who listens. So I listened. I stayed silent during their cross-examinations. I watched the strategy. I memorized the faces of every junior associate, every paralegal Julian's team brought into that courtroom. And then I built a war room of my own. I called up someone from law school, Sienna Kerr, a litigator with a brutal mind and zero tolerance for theatrics. I didn't need flash. I needed precision. Sienna's response when she saw the complaint: "This isn't just framing. This is a financial assassination." And she was right. We started documenting everything: transaction logs, server metadata, timestamp anomalies, internal Slack messages that had been wiped but not from off-site backups I had quietly maintained. I'd built redundancies into our company's systems for disaster recovery. Turns out I was the disaster they needed to recover from. Then came the USB. I received it in the mail. No return address. Just a sticky note with the words, "He said you'd never see this." It was a video, Julian, sitting across from one of our junior partners in a lounge drink in hand, laughing. "She won't even know what hit her," he said. "Hell, I might even cry in court just to seal the deal." Give them that emotional husband crap. Works every time. The video was time-stamped 18 months before the trial. That USB became our crown jewel. But we didn't use it right away. No, we waited. We built the case brick by brick, quietly, thoroughly. Let Julian believe I was broken. Let him parade through interviews talking about rebuilding. Let him court new investors under my name. Because when we walked back into that courtroom, he wouldn't just lose the case, he'd lose everything. They say courtrooms are places of truth. That's a lie. Courtrooms are war zones, and in war, truth is only as powerful as the person speaking it. And in my trial, Julian had the microphone. The courtroom was ice cold that day. Or maybe it was just me frozen from the inside out. I sat at the defendant's table in a navy blue suit I hadn't worn in years. The air smelled like old paper cold steel and stale coffee. Julian sat across from me, pristine as ever. Tailored, charcoal suit, silk tie the color of dried blood. His hands folded neatly on the table, his expression composed concern. Like he was praying for me, he played it perfectly. The opening arguments from his legal team were crafted like an execution order. Elegant, precise, fatal. They accused me of manipulating Cross and Harrington's financial systems to launder millions into private accounts. Claimed I forged documents to redirect corporate funds to a shell company registered in the Caymans. They had charts, PowerPoints, emails I never wrote. But they had my name on them, my digital signature, metadata showing time-stamped logins from my devices. I watched the jury's eyes narrow. A few of them leaned forward. Others glanced at me as if I were a wild animal brought into the room in shackles they couldn't see. Then came Julian's testimony. He stood with a calculated hesitation, enough to show reluctance, just enough to win sympathy. "I love my wife," he said to the court, voice trembling, "but the evidence doesn't lie. And if I allow this company, our company, to fall because I looked the other way, I'd be failing every employee who trusted us." He took a breath. I begged her to get help. But she wouldn't listen. His voice cracked, theatrically. I knew that crack. It was the one he used when pitching to investors during our startup years, just before asking for their money. And just like that, the courtroom leaned in. Even the judge softened. I sat still. I didn't blink. I didn't protest. I didn't whisper a word to my attorney, because I knew how this game worked. And more importantly, I knew how it would end. Julian's lawyer pulled up a series of financial documents next. The spreadsheets were doctored, but cleverly. Just small shifts in routing numbers, timing of transactions, overlapping authorizations. To anyone outside our original accounting team, it would look real. Worse, it would look intentional. And because I'd built those systems, the prosecution framed it as the ultimate betrayal. She didn't just steal the lawyer announced. She engineered the platform that made it possible. The irony made my throat ache. They were using the very precision I created to hang me. Every dollar I tracked. Every line of code I had reviewed, every risk mitigation protocol I had written, now twisted into proof that I had gamed the system. They even had psychiatric testimony. A corporate psychologist who'd never met me testified based on behavioral patterns that I showed signs of narcissistic delusion, common in high-functioning female executives under pressure. The judge allowed it. The jury took notes. And I smiled, just barely, because that was when I knew they had overplayed. You don't assassinate a woman's character with psych evaluations from someone who's never seen her bleed. You do that when you're running out of real ammo. And Julian was running out because I had already started drying up his supply. What no one in that courtroom knew was that my attorney, Sienna Kerr, was already dismantling every fake document they'd built. Quietly, methodically. She didn't object often, but when she did, it was surgical. Objection, lack of foundation. Objection, speculative conclusion. Objection, facts, not an evidence. She was bleeding their arguments slowly, like a slow pinprick in a balloon they didn't realize was deflating. We didn't reveal our cards. Not yet. Because the truth doesn't just win trials. Timing does. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, my name was being buried. News outlets ran stories about my mental state, about past hospital visits for exhaustion. Old colleagues anonymously confirmed I was hard to work with and too intense. They said Julian had always been the calm one. I became the villain. In a narrative, Julian carefully designed a story where ambition became madness and silence became guilt. Even my own brother called to ask if I'd really done it. "Just tell me the truth, Isla," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "If it's over your head, we'll find a way to deal with it, but you can't keep lying." I hung up. I didn't owe anyone an explanation, not yet, because this wasn't about survival anymore. This was about war. And my revenge wasn't rage, it wasn't violence, it wasn't screaming from the stands like some scorned, hysterical woman. My revenge was going to be immaculate, so I went quiet. I watched the trial unfold like a symphony, each note played exactly as Julian had arranged. His team was confident. His eyes sparkled each time a new piece of evidence landed against me. He thought it was checkmate, but he forgot who taught him to play chess. While he celebrated the destruction of my reputation, my people were building something Sienna had already subpoenaed server access logs from a third-party cloud backup provider Julian forgot we used. I had personally set it up years ago, redundant data systems as a failsafe for disasters. Turns out I was the disaster. The log showed Julian's logins, his edits, his approvals from VPNs in foreign countries. Activity on my credentials traced back to devices registered under his name. We had dates times IPs, and we had the smoking gun. An employee, Kyle Ramirez, one of our former interns, came forward with a sworn affidavit. He had been paid to backdate emails on Julian's behalf, said he felt morally trapped but had no idea the scheme would go this far. He handed us a paper trail, Venmo screenshots, private messages, even recordings. And then came the jewel, the USB. That footage of Julian in a bar laughing, boasting how he'd bury Isla in the courtroom and cry for the cameras. We authenticated it, preserved it, and then tucked it away, waiting, not for a counterattack, but for the moment it would collapse everything. Because I didn't want to win the trial, I wanted to destroy his story. I didn't vanish, I just got very, very quiet. After the second week of trial, public opinion had all but buried me. They called me Lady Enron on Reddit, joked about prison orange matching my skin tone, and debated on live panels whether I was a narcissist, a sociopath, or just another woman who flew too close to power. And I said nothing. I let them laugh. I let them forget that silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's sharpening the blade. Julian's people thought they had destroyed me. They didn't know I'd already started rebuilding. While they were dragging my name through headlines, I was in a borrowed studio apartment on the east side of Manhattan, sitting on a floor mattress with 3 laptops, no furniture, and a bottle of red wine I couldn't even afford to enjoy. But I had something more valuable access. I still had my brain, my systems, my contacts, and most importantly, I still had the respect of the people Julian discarded. My first call was to Marla Chen, one of the sharpest marketing execs I'd ever hired at Cross and Harrington. Julian let her go when she was 7 months pregnant because her energy didn't match the firm anymore. Her voice cracked when I told her who it was. "You have no idea how long I've been waiting for this call," she whispered. That night we built the skeleton of something new. A company not tied to Julian's name, but to mine. We called it Harrington Strategies. It was a quiet beast, no launch party, no press, no pitch decks floating through LinkedIn. I kept everything under the radar. Shell corporations, NDA-locked contractors, private funding only. And I hired the people Julian left behind, laid off talent, the ones he called dead weight, the too loud, the too soft, the too pregnant, the too ethnic, the too difficult. They became my army, and oh, how brilliant they were. By week 6 of the trial, Harrington Strategies had silently secured 4 contracts from clients Julian had once deemed too small to matter. One of them, Bronstein Biotech, a quiet but powerful pharma data firm worth $400 million. They didn't care about the headlines. They cared that I had built their revenue model 5 years ago, and no one could read their financial blind spots like I could. By month 2, we had a team of 17 working in shifts out of a rented warehouse in Long Island, powered by takeout resentment and the kind of loyalty you can't fake when you've all been betrayed. And yet, I never once mentioned Julian's name in our meetings, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about outliving the lie, and it worked. Every week I watched his empire rot from within. He was so obsessed with my trial, so busy winning in court, that he never noticed the floorboards buckling beneath him. Suppliers started demanding upfront payments. 2 of his junior partners defected quietly, submitting resignations while forwarding key files to me through private channels, and I kept building. But not just a business, I built a case. Sienna, my attorney, was orchestrating a counterattack so subtle, so devastating, it made Julian's courtroom theater look like amateur improv. We didn't just find one forged document, we found 12 all signed using a digital signature generator traced back to a laptop in Julian's home office. The kicker. That device was logged into at the same time I was verifiably attending a conference in Geneva. We had customs records, photos, and biometric hotel key data, but we didn't present it yet. Because Sienna had taught me something critical, justice, she said, isn't a hammer, it's a scalpel. Use it too soon and you miss the artery, so we let them keep bleeding. Julian went on Bloomberg Live and gave an exclusive about how the hardest part was losing the woman he loved, but the company had to survive. He wiped away a single tear on air. And I sat there in my warehouse office eating ramen off a cardboard box and whispered to my screen, "You have no idea how close you are to ruin." That night, I walked to the river wrapped in a coat I hadn't worn since grad school. The wind cut through me like glass. I thought of everything I'd lost. My reputation, my circle, my brother who still hadn't returned my calls. My godson, whose birthday party I'd missed because I couldn't show my face around family friends without whispers trailing behind me. I let the grief come finally, alone, without spectacle. And then I let it go, because grief doesn't rebuild empires, resolve does. The next morning I called Marla and told her it was time to scale. She didn't even ask why. By the end of the third month, Harrington Strategies had landed a silent partnership with Vericon Systems, a defense-adjacent tech firm with ties to 3 government projects. Julian didn't know it yet, but 2 of his largest investors were already in talks with us, ready to jump ship the moment his fraud leaked. Because even the rich don't like betting on a sinking yacht, and Julian's hull was already cracked. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that I was about to own the company he built off my back, not with scandal, not with screaming headlines, but with documents, deeds, contracts, data. The kind of revenge that doesn't scream. It signs, it closes, it acquires. And when the moment came when Sienna turned to me and said, "We're ready to file the countersuit," I simply nodded. Because the knife was finally sharp enough, and it was time to cut deep. Courtrooms are strange places. Not because they hold truth, but because they pretend to. But truth doesn't need a judge to exist. It sits, it waits. It whispers from hard drives and data logs, from call recordings and signed affidavits, until someone's finally ready to put it on the record. And that day had come. The final hearing began on a gray Thursday morning, the sky outside the courthouse swollen with winter clouds, like even the weather knew something was about to break. I walked in wearing black. No color, no earrings, no tears, just tailored silence. Sienna walked beside me, her briefcase locked, like a vault heels echoing down the hallway like a countdown. Julian was already there, flanked by 2 of the most expensive lawyers in Manhattan, dressed like he'd already won. His tie was cobalt blue, the same color as our wedding flowers. It was subtle, theatrical, cruel. His eyes met mine. He smirked. He thought this was the final burial. He didn't know it was a resurrection. The judge entered, gavel fell, and the proceeding began with the usual posturing, his counsel trying to push for early judgment, claiming my defense was incoherent and delaying the inevitable. Sienna let them talk. She let them laugh. She let them mount the gallows. And then she stood. "Your Honor," she said, calm as a closing elevator door, "we have new evidence. Admissible. Time-stamped. Authenticated by an independent cybersecurity firm." The courtroom shifted. Julian's jaw stiffened. Sienna placed 3 folders on the desk. Not 1. 3. Exhibit A, a complete metadata report showing login activity to our company's financial systems from Julian's home network. At times, I was verifiably out of the country. My passport, hotel key records, biometric scans. Julian's attorney objected, fabricated, irrelevant, immaterial. Overruled. Exhibit B, a sworn affidavit from Kyle Ramirez, the intern Julian paid off. It outlined specific instructions Kyle was given to backdate financial transactions, forge email headers, and scrub audit trails. Attached were screenshots, transaction IDs, private messages. Julian's voice on a call saying the words, "Just make it look like Isla did it. She won't fight it." Silence fell. But we weren't done. Sienna reached into her case like a magician pulling the final card. She held up a USB drive wrapped in an evidence bag, marked with a chain of custody tag. "Exhibit C, Your Honor," she said, turning toward the bench. "This footage is time-stamped 18 months before the original indictment. The man in this video, Julian Cross, is seen discussing his plan to frame my client. You'll hear him admit to planting evidence, manipulating public perception, and instructing his team to cry on command during depositions." The courtroom dropped 10 degrees. Julian stood suddenly. "This is a violation." The judge raised a hand like a blade. "Sit down, Mr. Cross." The footage played. There was Julian, lounging in a private club, drink in hand, laughing with one of his junior execs. "She'll fold," he said on the screen. "All that fire, it's for show. Just need to tip her over the edge, then boom, I'm the grieving husband. Hell, I might even cry in court for the drama." Laughter followed, toasting glasses. And then the words that burned through the courtroom like gasoline, "Isla doesn't know it yet, but she's already gone." The room went still. Not quiet, still. Even the stenographer looked up. The judge removed his glasses, pressed his fingers against the bridge of his nose like he was suppressing either a migraine or a scream. Julian didn't look at me. For the first time since this began, he couldn't. His lawyers fumbled. One asked for a recess. Another mumbled something about fabrication and intent to mislead. The judge's voice was like thunder behind a locked door. "I'll review every detail, every document, and every recorded word. But know this, what I just heard doesn't sound like business. It sounds like premeditated legal sabotage. And then he said something I'll never forget. This isn't just betrayal, this is a corporate execution. Julian sat down, but I stood. I didn't need to testify. I wasn't called to the stand. But the judge gave me the floor. Miss Harrington, he said, is there anything you'd like to add? I turned, faced the jury. The press, the man I once trusted with my body, my business, my name, and I said I didn't come here to beg, I came to finish what I started. My voice didn't shake, because I wasn't speaking from pain, I was speaking from reclamation. I sat back down, the gavel fell. The hearing was adjourned pending final judgment. The media exploded before I even left the building. By 3:00 p.m., Julian's face was on every news channel, every investor group chat, every executive blacklist. By 6:00 p.m., 2 of his board members resigned. By midnight, a freeze was placed on all assets in his name pending investigation for financial fraud, perjury, and obstruction. And by the next morning, the whispers had turned into headlines. CEO implodes after hidden footage exposes fraud scheme. From power couple to public collapse, the Isla Harrington trial turns on USB evidence, the woman who made a judge cry. Because yes, he cried. Not in front of the jury, not for the cameras, but later. In the chambers. After the courtroom cleared, the judge called Sienna and me in privately. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked up and said, I've never seen a weapon wielded so quietly. And I've never been more ashamed of how easy it is to destroy a woman with a lie. His voice cracked. Not because he was weak, but because truth, when it finally lands, doesn't just reveal, it reorders. And I walked out of that courthouse with no fanfare, no applause, no dramatic music playing in the background, just peace, the kind you earn when you survive hell and turn it into your foundation. But the story wasn't over, because I didn't just survive Julian Cross. I was about to become his boss. The silence after a storm is never truly quiet. It hums, with debris, with damage, with the knowledge that what existed before is gone and what remains is yours to define. Julian's empire fell in less than 48 hours. His name was scrubbed from the board. A special investigation committee was launched. Investors pulled out. Brand deals died mid-contract. I didn't gloat. I watched. From my corner office at Harrington Strategies, 5 floors above his former headquarters in a building I now owned through a holding company he'd never heard of. That was the beauty of it. He didn't even know who bought him out. Not at first. See, in the weeks leading up to the trial's end, while Julian paraded himself in press junkets and interviews, I'd been quietly negotiating the acquisition of his remaining shares through a shell entity, piece by piece, partner by partner. And when the judgment landed and he was stripped of his authority, guess who stepped in as the silent majority stakeholder? Me, Isla Harrington, the woman he thought he could bury. He was forced to watch from the sidewalk as I walked into his old building past the golden logo that still bore his name for now. I didn't say a word. I didn't even look at him. That was my final mercy. Behind those doors, I didn't throw a party. I held a staff meeting. Half the employees hadn't been paid in 2 weeks. Most of the leadership had already fled. I didn't scream. I didn't point fingers. I stood at the head of the boardroom table, the very one Julian once slammed his fists on when he didn't get his way, and said, if you want to stay, you stay. If you want to go, I'll write your severance myself. But from this moment forward, no one in this building will ever be punished for telling the truth. 12 people walked out. 53 stayed. We gutted the company from the inside, tore down the infrastructure Julian had built on manipulation, fear, and optics, rewrote the culture, rebuilt the tech, and rebranded the entire organization under a new name, the Harrington Collective. But I didn't stop there. I turned the 3rd floor, his old executive suite, into something else entirely, a legal access resource center for women who had been financially silenced, defrauded, or manipulated in domestic partnerships and business dealings. Pro bono representation, anonymous consultations, no prerequisites, no judgment, just power handed back. The first time I stood in that office alone, I looked around at the walls that once echoed with his voice. I took off my heels, placed them on the floor beside me, and stood in silence, not because I was emotional, but because I was free, and I finally believed it. The man who once said, "You're too emotional to handle real power now," had his mailbox redirected to a P.O. box behind a liquor store in New Jersey. The last time I heard his voice was through his lawyer. They requested a settlement conversation, a last attempt to reclaim some piece of dignity, to close things respectfully. I declined. Some stories don't need a final page. But I did send a letter, typed, signed, delivered by hand. It read, "You taught me to be cold, efficient, ruthless with details. I learned, I applied, and I built something no lie could touch. You built your empire on borrowed charm and stolen credit. I built mine on truth and the ruins you left me in. Thank you for the lesson. May it echo in every empty room you now walk through. I never heard back, but I didn't need to, because the world saw the truth now. And so did I. I wasn't just the woman he framed. I wasn't just the co-founder, or the wife, or the broken name in a headline. I was Isla Harrington, and I had become the storm he thought would never come. The press tried to turn it into a redemption arc. Woman scorned reclaims fortune, from victim to venture titan. They missed the point. This was never about revenge. It was about returning home to myself, about creating a world where no woman would ever again need to choose between her power and her peace. And maybe, just maybe, about proving that silence is not weakness. It is strategy. The courtroom didn't make me. The collapse didn't break me. Julian didn't end me. He just gave me a mirror, and I chose to step through it instead of shattering. So now I sit here in my office at the top of a building that used to belong to him, and I run companies in my name, write checks in mine, and help women rewrite endings they were told they never deserved. This wasn't a comeback. It was a coronation. And I didn't need anyone's permission, not even his.